Good to see I'm not the only one gone silver fox.
It's distinguished, right? Like we're.
Well, you can say distinguished. I'm just going with the silver sister.
Okay.
Fine by me.
Silver hair is in right now.
That's what they're doing.
Post-COVID, people are rocking it.
My wife has been cutting my hair for the last 18 months, so I'm trying to figure out how to merge back into normal barbershop mentality. Sure.
I think last time I saw most people in person, I had a pixie cut, which I definitely don't have anymore.
Yeah, I was at an in-person conference in Austin a couple weeks ago, and that was eye-opening. Even living in North Carolina, going to Texas and just experiencing all that is Texas right now. It's a whole different country down there.
I'm sure it's a lot like Arkansas.
Maybe.
There's
Hello and welcome everybody to this final panel, brand owner focused on fostering circularity at the end of the plastic supply chain. I am Helen McGeough, Senior Analyst for Plastics Recycling at ICIS. I'm also the Global Analyst Team Lead as we have now built up our global presence across Americas, Asia and Europe. Very pleased to be joined today by three esteemed speakers here. We have Charlie Schwartz, Director of Packaging Sustainability at Keurig Dr Pepper, Ashley Hall, Director of Sustainability at Walmart, and Anne Tracy, Chief Sustainability Officer at Colgate-Palmolive. So first of all, perhaps each of you could do a brief introduction of yourself, your role and your organisation. Perhaps we can start with Charlie.
Great. Thank you, Helen. Charlie Schwartz with Keurig Dr Pepper. I head up packaging sustainability. We're a North American focused, US headquartered modern beverage company focused on cold and hot non-alcoholic beverages. Within our packaging sustainability agenda, We're focused on goals around recyclability, recycled content, and reduction in virgin plastic usage as we move toward 2025, in line with several of the brands that you're probably familiar with. We are also engaged in several projects around infrastructure development, mainly in the US, where we are primarily focused with our beverage distribution to be able to move toward a more sustainable recycling infrastructure, as well as looking at reuse and refill opportunities in both the plastics and other materials space. It's great to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Ashley, can we come to you next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Ashley C. Hall, Director of Sustainability for Walmart. I go by Ashley C. Hall because there are over 20 Ashley Halls that work for Walmart. So if you want to reach me, you must remember the C. It's a pleasure to be here today. Walmart, of course, is a global retailer with its own private brands. We are part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's global commitment, which means that we, by 2025, aspire to achieve 100% recyclable, reusable, and 100% compostable private brand packaging. And additionally, we are part of many of the different international pacts, including the US and Canada. We are also engaged, similar to what Charlie had said, in a range of different organizations like the Recycling Partnership aimed at improving infrastructure. And we really take a holistic approach when we think of packaging and plastics and circularity and plastic reduction. We think about how do we engage with our customers so that we ensure it's adopted? How do we think about reuse and refill systems? When does substitution make sense? How do we collect more materials? And I think a main topic we'll talk through today is around recycled content and how do we get more of it?
So, great. Thank you very much, Ashley. And last but by no means least, Anne.
Hi, everyone. I'm also really pleased to be here. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Colgate-Palmolive. I've spent a long time at Colgate. I just passed my 30-year anniversary. I grew up in the supply chain. So looking forward to the discussion around recycled content and how that impacts the supply chain and how we're going to move forward. I'm actually our first Chief Sustainability Officer. I've been heading up sustainability for 4 years now. Colgate has 4 core categories. We have, of course, oral care, personal care, home care, and we also own Hill's Pet Nutrition. And I guess in terms of how we look at plastics, the short answer is I could say ditto to Charlie and Ashley. But just the quick rundown is we are also part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Commitment and have, of course, those same, aspirations to be 100% recyclable, compostable, or reusable by 2025. And we also have a reduction commitment to reduce our virgin plastic by 1/3 by 2025, with a baseline of 2019, which means we can't increase any more from here on out. And a big part of that will be to increase recycled content. It's not the only solution, but it will be a major driver, as well as experimenting in and scaling refill and reuse models. And we partner many of the same that Ashley mentioned, the plastic packs, the recycling partnership. We are a US-based multinational company, so we also have similar partnerships in Europe, like Europen and PRE, and we'll talk more about it. But also our partnership with Walmart is very important, and they give us a lot of good direction on what they expect. So I'm excited to be part of this panel today.
Thank you very much. So let's dive straight in. We've got some questions prepared, as everybody knows, but I do invite everybody to get their questions in through the Slido as well, so we can share those a little bit nearer the end of this section. So let's look at, we've touched upon this in various presentations throughout this conference, but for each of you individually as organisations, what are some of the key challenges you face when integrating recycled content into your product lines, and how can the polymer industry help you to address that? Perhaps we can start with you, Charlie.
So I think as we look at integrating more recycled content into our products, the largest 2 categories that we have are PET and polypropylene rigids. With PET, it's a fairly mature industry. We know that we are going to have challenges on supply as every company that has signed up for the 2025 Ellen MacArthur Global Commitment are looking to move toward, probably a minimum of 25% PCR in their packaging, and sometimes more than that. Along with other end uses of recycled PET, that means that we're going to have to boost supply. So supply is one thing. We're getting much more active in the policy space within the US specifically to look at what are the right types of policies, whether that's EPR, if it's well designed, or even deposit legislation, if it's well designed. For a multinational company who is distributing in all 50 states in the US, we would prefer to have those things come at the national level, but we understand the challenges of doing that as well. So that's supply. We're also engaged in voluntary initiatives where we're increasing the quality of infrastructure in existing recycling facilities. So with the Polypropylene Recycling Coalition, which is a part of the Recycling Partnership, we've committed $10 million over 5 years to increase the sortation of polypropylene. And with the Every Bottle Back initiative through the American Beverage Association, we're also granting funds to improve access and then sortation quality for PET. With polypropylene, it's a bit more challenging because of the nature of that material to get it back into a food grade product. So for example, our K-Cup pods or our Mott's applesauce containers. So we're actively looking at partnerships and early stage innovations on companies that are able to really solidly move materials into a food contact recycled polypropylene. A lot of those are advancing. We think advanced recycling or chemical recycling, whichever you prefer, is a and solution to mechanical recycling. And we're actively looking at how that can be part of the mix. And this meeting is competing with the Association of Plastics Recyclers meeting, where that is a front and center topic as well. So we continue to need to boost solutions for that type of material. But those are some of the challenges that we're looking at and how we're addressing that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anne, what about Colgate?
Yeah, Charlie covered it very, very well. All the same points, I guess. So I'm not going to repeat what Charlie added. I think maybe a couple of additional things I would chime in on are the economics of recycled content. Right now, this is the whole kind of crux of the circular economy, to get it to scale where it becomes a level playing field and it isn't negatively impacting margins, which at the end of the day, we believe in the triple bottom line, but profit is one of those bottom lines. So we have to be cognizant of that and manage that. So that is a challenge. I do believe as the world scales and we shift to the circular economy, that problem will be, that challenge will reduce. I guess the other thing too that I think is interesting, and being a consumer goods company, is the consumer, and the fact that, globally, I'm sure most of your audience has heard that only 9% of, on average, 9% of the plastic actually gets collected, sorted, and the yield is very low when we recycle. So, it's trying to understand how to influence the consumer, the people who take our products home and use them. And many of the products that we sell, like for brushing your teeth, washing your hands, are just very kind of, mindless behaviors that they do every day. And, it's hard to kind of change behaviors and get people to think differently. Colgate toothpaste, the Colgate brand, is actually the highest household penetrated consumer products brand in the world. We're in 6 out of 10 households globally. So we've sat back and we thought about that, and we said with that kind of penetration, we have an obligation or a responsibility even to communicate with consumers and to try to begin to help them understand why this is important, what we need to do. So I think our brands have a responsibility to reach consumers and influence their behaviors.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up consumers. I've got a question about that. Perhaps Ashley can give her input first.
Yes. So I think we should rename this group the Ditto Dialogue, because I don't think there's going to be much strife between us. We're all part of very similar organizations. We're all struggling with the same things. So I'm going to echo what Anne said, which is I'm not going to repeat what each of them said because I agree, but I am going to add my own twist on it. So first, I think it's a really good problem to have when so many multinational, huge corporations all want to use recycled content. I mean, if you were to have what the dream scenario, worst nightmare might be, I put that at the top, right? We want the material. It's active conversations that are taking place across our companies to the highest levels of the companies to talk about how do we get more material that's consistent, that's good, that addresses price fluctuation and can go into more applications. So that is critical. I'd say with consumers, it's been disappointing to see, especially in the US, a decrease in the amount of bottles that are being recycled. You know, well, most people have access somewhere to be able to recycle a beverage bottle. That's probably one of the most highly recyclable items for plastic that's in the US. But we're not at the 30% recycling rate. We're going down. And how do we bump that back up? Because obviously what we've been doing to date is not enough. So how do we think about incentivizing the customer? And to Charlie's point, how do we look at well-designed policy, ideally at a federal level, to help spur and encourage consumer adoption of recycling and to make it something where it's valued and they feel that they get something out of it other than just good job, you're doing the right thing. I think additionally, design is a critical component that hasn't been talked about. So many of us are part of the Consumer Goods Forum's Plastics Coalition of Action Working Group, and I'm one of the co-leads for that design section. And as brand owners and retailers, we understand that we have the ability to truly own the design of our products and packaging. We can't necessarily control what a customer does with the package at the end of life or how a recycling facility operates, but we can control how the package is designed. And if companies are designing packages that are not designed to be recyclable, that's a problem. And I like to tell people, and those who know me, I met my husband 10 years ago at a Walmart sustainable packaging event talking about labels and adhesive issues with plastics. And we are still talking about the same issues today. So it's really about time that companies come up and start doing the best in class design methods. There's really no reason why they shouldn't. And anyone who doesn't, whether it's from naivety or what have you, is actually hurting the benefit of recycling because you're getting less quality material, which creates lower value and makes it harder to use in a consistent way. I would also say the other interesting thing that is already being looked at, and I hope excels further, is how do you do, a lot of PET, for instance, recycled content is going into fiber or it's going into thermoforms. And how do we make sure that bottles can go back to bottles, thermoforms can go back to thermoforms, and fibers can go back to fibers, or at the very least, fibers are using non-food grade applications so that the food grade material goes to food applications. And I don't know if the system is savvy enough to really think that way. I think right now it's just a grabbing game. You got it, I want it, I'll take what I can get. But if we take a step back and be a little bit more thoughtful about how we're sourcing the material and frankly, how we're collecting it, I think that can make tremendous strides in our use and availability of recycled content.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to sort of do the comparisons with Europe, as it's a lot of these issues that you've all talked about and how they are the same issues, but are being kind of reacted to and responded to in a very different way in Europe. But absolutely, lots of key points there. But I do think there's a lot of onus, therefore, on brands in markets such as the US as the example where, in Europe, consumers very much are driving the change as much as anybody. But in the US, it just seems a little bit slower. So that does put more onus on the brands. But it's interesting to see your perspectives on that. Yeah, and sort of touching back onto some of the points about the economics of all of this, I guess is leading into our next point on how do you balance or best balance those internal dynamics of, your purchasing requirements and your sustainability goals. Perhaps we can start with Anne first.
Yeah, well, I already touched on it. It is a challenge, and I think it takes commitment and vision. We're U.S.-based companies. U.S. tends to be, on the stock market, a short-term kind of reactionary when we work with our businesses. But it does take, I think Ashley mentioned this, it takes commitment from the top. It takes commitment from our senior leadership to balance meeting our short-term goals, but at the same time, staying on track with our longer-term transformation and vision. We have our purpose statement is we are reimagining a healthier future for all people, their pets, and our planet. And we mean that, and that takes, building the roadmap to get there and staying the course. We do, I think Ashley started to articulate, as we get to a more optimized collection and sorting system, which I think that's going to come in the future. I think it's going to take innovation. It's going to take the recycling industry to step up to the Internet of Things, to automation, to robotics, that will help enable some of what Ashley described. But it all comes back to what they derive and get out of that process. Does it have value? And there is this huge supply and demand tension going on right now. All of our companies have committed to this. We all need that content. So somehow we have to reconcile that supply and demand curve and then scale it. And I believe it can happen, but it is going to take many stakeholders to play a key role in this, including the government. Even investor pressure to move in this direction will help, which we're starting to see much more of course, with the ESG focus. But the right regulations, we like to call it Consumer Goods Forum, optimal EPR systems, where companies like ours, we support EPR. We want to play a role in the governance of that, so we ensure we get the right recycled content, food grade, as many of us require, back into our systems. Procurement is playing a critical role in helping us. I joke, but our CPO and myself are joined at the hip. A day doesn't go by that we're not talking on this topic or some other sustainability topics. We are definitely aligned, and I could in no way move forward without her collaboration and her team's collaboration. So that is a critical relationship for me in my role. I think the future will come. It's going to take commitment and a vision to get there.
Okay, thank you. Ashley, perhaps we could have your views.
Ditto.
Yeah.
No. So Walmart is focused on being a regenerative company, and regeneration for packaging involves circularity and using recycled content. And that takes investment. That takes investment both in the short-term pain points from paying a bit more for recycled content than a virgin material, but also paying for infrastructure improvements and other things so that hopefully it isn't forever a more expensive option, and virgin actually becomes more of a difficulty than using recycled content. We want the best sustainable option to be the easiest one for companies to go towards. I think taking it a little bit different approach to keep it interesting for us, because I agreed with everything Anne said. I think, with extended producer responsibility models that are out there today, whether it's in the US or in other places, in many of them, they have the term eco-modulation, which is essentially saying that if you design it the right way, the best way, using, the best ingredients, it should not cost more than for those that are not thinking with the end of life in mind or circularity.
Mhm.
I have not felt that has really been taken advantage of by the different, bodies that have EPR in place. I think it's almost two different parts of the brains working. The part that says, okay, these are the taxes we're going to have to pay, and this is how we're designing it because that's how we've always designed it. And they aren't necessarily connecting the dots. That's my personal point of view, not just a Walmart point of view. But I do think that if eco-modulation was thought of a bit differently, we could actually make it so that it makes more competitive sense to go for recycled content, and the value is really there, and that there's more taxation put on those who are using virgin material. So I think that there's some interesting dynamics to explore there. I'm not a policy person, so if any of you are listening going, oh my God, like, forgive me. But I do think that there's something there to consider. But ultimately, whenever Walmart sets a really big, ambitious goal like this, there's a tremendous amount of back work that goes on to say, can we achieve this? How achievable is this? Is it, slam dunk? If it is, we're not doing enough and we need to up our ambition. But do we have a line of sight of where we need to go? Is it going to cost more money? Probably at the beginning, but when we set the goal, we intend to get to it and do everything we can to achieve it. And I don't think we're alone in that. So I hope that gives confidence to all those listening that this is something where the conversations are serious, they're difficult, but we're in it for the long haul.
Excellent. Very encouraging to hear. Okay, Charlie, what's your take on this?
That's tough being third here. Yeah, definitely agree with the points that have been made so far. I think, on that line from Ashley's, we've set very clear roadmaps looking at what our growth is going to look like, what our formats are going to look like, and what the consumer consumption is going to look like into the future, because we know the way that consumer buys and consumes in 2025 is going to probably be pretty different from where it is today. If you look at, pack sizes and how consumption and buying patterns are moving, that's going to change how we look at things in terms of the plastics and the types of plastics that our customers are buying. So we have a fairly dynamic roadmap for all of the brands that we work with as we're moving toward 2025. In terms of how we're working with procurement from a Keurig Dr. Pepper centric perspective, we have several cross-functional teams, which I assume all of these companies do, that are aligned, reporting into the CEO on progress. With procurement, we really work collaboratively with them to look at what is new that is happening within our supply chain. The last question that you had was, how can the companies, the petrochemicals, the other plastics, resins producers, how can they help us achieve our goals? And it's really by presenting options to us, because as Ashley said, we know there's going to be investment to be able to make these goals. Something that is new that maybe costs a little bit more in the beginning isn't necessarily going to get a head shake from procurement right now. It's going to get how can we work together on this? Because we know that there's going to be investment that needs to be made here. We'd love it if a consumer would pay for that investment. Maybe not always the case, especially in the US where we're really focused. So I think that's, that collaborative investment, as well as looking at how can procurement play a part in looking at early stage innovation, along with our R&D teams and our innovation teams, to look at new options, whether it's something in the advanced recycling space for a new material, or a different type of conversion technology, or even a new type of plastic resin that may perform better. I think the other thing from our side as we look at these 2025 goals is we also have carbon reduction goals that packaging plays a huge role in. So we're constantly trying to balance the recyclability, which we know we have to meet, but also not wanting to change to another material just to get out of a certain substrate. So for this audience in this group, we're not moving away from plastics because we know that there is a huge benefit there, but we need to fix some of the broken parts of the system. Procurement plays a huge role in that. And ideally, we'd like to get to a state where we're not always talking about a cost addition, which seems to be a lot of the conversations that we're having currently. And oh, by the way, we're in probably one of the most challenged times in supply chain and procurement right now.
Right.
So, hats off to our procurement teams who are working around the clock, but they're still keeping the sustainability priority as, fairly high on their agenda, which is amazing given all that's going on right now.
Right. It's very encouraging to hear that commitment to plastics, given the benefits of it, which is probably one of the big messages that gets lost in all of this. And obviously, there are issues that need to be addressed by the industry, absolutely no doubt. But that has influenced some consumers, for instance, when we particularly look at the plastics pollution crisis. But with that in mind, what about consumers? Sorry, yes, Ashley.
Yes, can I give a little different spin to that?
Sure.
So I agree with what Charlie said. Is plastics is a valuable material, but I would challenge everyone, if you come across a package that's plastics wrapped around plastics, or an unnecessarily large amount of headspace where it's just unnecessary use of plastics, I'd ask everyone to take a step back and say, should we really be doing this? Sure, it might help the growth of your company, but I think if we're thoughtful and strategic about when and how we use the plastic packaging, then that helps the whole system at large. Because right now there's just some really egregious packages out there that are plastics wrapped around plastics that frustrates the customers and costs extra money for the manufacturers to use that material. And we can simplify. So, I think where it makes sense to use it, let's use it. But if we can all take that look, I think in the long run, it will benefit all of us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, reduction is one of those goals, right? And so absolutely that should be applied in the whole design aspect as well. Totally agree. I think I was referring perhaps more to the situation where the benefits of plastics is lost against perhaps alternative materials in particular applications, that gets a little bit lost, I think. But absolutely, reduction is another goal within all of this, apart from using recycle as well. So kind of coming back to, from your point of view, obviously you're all at the sharp end with the consumers. What do they want to see from plastic circular economy strategies moving forward? What are you hearing from them? And obviously not just US market, because you're all pretty far-reaching. So perhaps we'll start with Ashley, so you're not last and you can't have to do the detail. You can start it off, Ashley.
So for Walmart, the customer is number one always. And it's interesting because we see a dichotomy in how the customer reacts to plastic. So when we survey them, we hear there's too much waste. We don't like the fact that so much is going into the trash. We want more recycling, or simply moving out of plastics. There are people who want us to move out of plastics. But then you look at shopping behaviors, and it comes across differently. People like the convenience of plastics. There's a reason why we use plastics. There's a lot of benefit there. So, we're trying to balance that approach. Additionally, Charlie alluded to this. Some customers are willing to pay more for a more sustainable product or package. And while sure, that would be great, from a Walmart perspective, we don't want people to have to choose between what's good for them, what's good for the environment, and what they can afford. We think that it should be, all of our packaging should get there. All of it should be cost effective, and it should be, again, the de facto to make it circular and not the other way around. The challenge that we're going to see is how do we get the shift in mindset, which Anne talked about, in terms of behavior when it comes to recycling, so we can improve recycled content, the adoption of things like refillables or concentrates, and to use them appropriately. There's the reuse element of all of this is interesting, because in some cases you need to use more durable plastics for a reuse application. How do you make sure that the customer just doesn't throw that out or not recycle it? Or, that is a true concern. And we've seen that with our plastic bags in some areas, where if it's a thicker plastic bag, they will not reuse it and they'll just still think of it as single use. Or how do you make it convenient or worthy of a customer to spend the time necessary to change their behavior? And I think that goes back to incentives. It's not enough to say that it's good for the planet. people need more than that. People don't trust recycling works today. So how do we, and it's something we all need to work on together. How do we collectively work to engage the customer in a different way that surprises and delights them, but also helps us achieve our goals?
Absolutely. Yeah, very good points. Charlie, what about your perspective?
So I think we know from the research we've done internally and other research that we've seen over the years is that customers want the brands to take care of this for them. They don't want to look at a QR code and go deep into an app to look at the, down to the percentage level of recycled content there. They want the brands to take care of it for them. So as we have moved forward, we know that our 2025 goals are very important for all of the brands that we have an umbrella over. We've moved to 100% PCR in certain packages to be able to advance that agenda. And we're looking at more industry standard labels. So a couple of those, the How to Recycle label in the US is a very popular one. Moving to that as a more standard label instead of trying to create something ourselves. With the American Beverage Association through Every Bottle Back, we've started on our carbonated soft drinks and our water brands to put the Please Recycle with cap on, because we know that's a very important message. We're also trying to test and learn on a lot of these things because we just haven't done a lot of this in the past. So with that cap on top, the thesis is that, people will recycle that with the cap on. We're trying to test and learn with that as well. I think to Ashley's point on reuse and refill, the reason why you're seeing a lot of pilots that are out there is because the brands are really trying to learn what will actually resonate with the consumers and what can scale, because there is a lot of infrastructure build out that needs to happen with washing facilities and different aspects of that supply chain that are very different to the model that we've been using for the last 50 years. So, the consumer plays a big part in this. And I think, we need to continue to test new models and understand from them what's actually going to work to move away from this, make, take, dispose culture that we have right now.
Absolutely. Okay. And your thoughts?
Yeah. So again, the famous ditto, but let's see, maybe what I could do is talk to a couple of examples to bring it to life a little more. And what Ashley and Charlie both described, we call it the intention action gap. And for instance, there's data. Ipsos is one of the insight houses that quote that in their surveys that 92% of the consumers, when surveyed, will you buy more sustainable products? Will you do what's right for the planet? Yes, of course, that's what we want to do. But only 16% actually act on it. That gap is absolutely huge. And to Ashley's point, how do we close that gap? To me, I like to say the company that cracks that code is the one that's going to really win. And I think it is about creating a superior experience for the consumer. So you have to incentivize them. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by saying, I can't not do this. And one, I have a couple of examples. One that has nothing to do with Colgate, but our head of global packaging, who is my other partner in crime that I work very, very closely with. He likes to used this example, and he to inspire his team to come up with another soda stream. He's like, I got a soda stream for my birthday, and now I can't go back. I can't use anything but soda stream. I love soda stream. Because it's easy, it's good, it's sustainable, it's cost effective, and there's nothing not to like about it. So one of our recent launches, we call it the Keep toothbrush, and it's an aluminum handled toothbrush, and it's got a really nice feel, look, design, kind of a good heavy. It's a manual toothbrush with an aluminum handle, and it eliminates 80% of the plastic in that manual toothbrush versus a normal plastic, a manual toothbrush. So it's a significant amount of plastic reduction, but it has a replaceable head. So when the consumer gets to the store, to the shelf, they have all the normal plastic toothbrushes, and then they have the Keep toothbrush. The problem with the Keep toothbrush is it costs a little more initially to buy it, but you're supposed to keep it. That's why we call it Keep. You keep the handle. And over time, if you stick with this this model, you will replace the head. It'll end up being a much less expensive toothbrushing experience. But first they have to say, okay, I want to pay a little more to start, and then we also have to work with the customer. We call our retailers our customers. So Walmart's one of our in fact, Walmart's our biggest customer, by the way. But we have to convince them to stock the refill heads, knowing that they're not going to move for 6 months but people have to see that they're there to buy, so they know that they can get them in the future. So it's really it's different for the customer, for Walmart or Target or whatever retailer we're working with, because they want to see velocity, they want to see products move. So it's different for the customer, it's different for the consumer. So these, to Charlie's point, we're experimenting. We're trying to understand what it takes to drive these behavior changes.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, all the right words that we're hearing is convenience. This is why plastics has become so pervasive. That's what it's offered.
Well, and if I could, one other point I want, which isn't necessarily related, but I wanted to mention because Charlie brought it up, which is, our sustainability strategy has, it's holistic. So we have climate targets. We have net zero carbon targets. These are all, interrelated. They're not done in isolation. And the thing about plastic, it is the most efficient thing to ship. And then you get some consumers saying, oh, we should put it all in glass. Glass is incredibly inefficient to ship in terms of carbon. And where we're headed, we're involved in some consortiums to look at carbon labeling in the future. And I think Europe is going to get there first. But that's going to change the game if we put carbon labels on our products, and if we actually take end of life and plastic will have a much different carbon label than something in a glass bottle, for instance. So this is going to get interesting when we start to be even more transparent, when we can get that data.
Absolutely. We've only got a few minutes left, but I would like to get to a couple of the questions that have come in. Somebody's commented that discussions over the past 2 days have been around working across the value chain. And I think it would be good if anybody could give perhaps some examples of projects or partnerships that have happened that were unexpected. So some innovation that's happened, perhaps.
Could I just follow on what I was just talking about? Because this whole notion of carbon labeling on products is absolutely dependent on working across the whole value chain, upstream from suppliers to downstream even to consumers. I mean, we're only aspiring initially to label from cradle to shelf, so to speak, because it's very difficult to get the data all the way to the end of life when the consumer takes it home. But it takes immense collaboration and data flow across it. And those systems don't exist today. How to get the data from the suppliers to us to put the whole carbon labeling equation together, the whole LCA.
So maybe that's the partnership we want to see coming, right?
Alan, I would add that, there's been a number of organizations working on different issues for a very long time. And I think all of the panelists, we are a part of them. I think what we're seeing that is different is the fact that those different organizations are talking to each other more, and they are, and there's more of a broad understanding about where are there gaps in the work that's being done. So people are not stepping on each other's toes and doing rework. A great example of that is the Consumer Goods Forum design guides or golden design rules. Those are being implemented in Canada as part of their pact. And so instead of redoing it and spending a lot of time, it's, this has already been done by a group of stakeholders that we recognize and it makes sense. So let's adopt it and let's not reinvent the wheel. So I think that has been very refreshing. Additionally, there's an example in the US where Walmart.org helped fund with the Recycling Partnership and Systemic, the development of the Plastic IQ tool, which helps companies set targets for plastic circularity and thinking about reduction, reuse, et cetera. And that is based on real case studies and data from a range of different participating companies. So it brought in large, diverse stakeholders to give their input, as well as layered on with the science to say, if you are trying to reduce by X%, and you do these kinds of products, these are the kinds of activities you should consider joining in. And that is now being connected with the U.S. Plastics Pact reporting mechanism. So they talk to each other, right? So if you're already reporting to U.S. Plastics Pact, you can use this tool without having to re-enter in all your information, and you can get results. So I think that's going to be the exciting piece moving forward. No longer will you just be filling out surveys, but these surveys will then be giving you data and information back to say, great, we've assessed what you've shared. These are tools and resources that we recommend you consider, so that it, again, takes the legwork out and accelerates our work faster.
Yeah, I think simplifying reporting is music to all of our ears.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think the one that I would bring up, and I touched on it before, is the coalition that we co-founded in the US along with the Recycling Partnership. Walmart Foundation is a steering committee member along with Braschem and the Polypropylene Recycling Coalition. And that was really in response to polypropylene being changed from a widely recycled to a check locally recycled item in the US, based on the Sustainable Packaging Coalition's Access to Recycling study. And in the span of a year, we have over 20 funders in that group right now. We've invested over $4 million in advanced sortation equipment across MRF's material recovery facilities in the US, and actually advanced the access by 6%, give or take, in the US, which is no small feat in the span of 12 months. So, and that, Braschem probably watching here today, you have recyclers, polypropylene recyclers, brands, retailers, all coming together because there is a threat to a material.
Absolutely. And we talk about plastic circularity. I mean, that circularity expands to all of that knowledge, that experience, that works, the best in class information. That also needs to be circular and shared around so that you can all get the benefit of that. Absolutely. I think that's a really critical part. Just quickly, one question's come in for Anne. You say it says CEO here, but I think they mean CPO, and you are aligned. Do you think this is critical to Colgate Palmolive's sustainability success, and do enough brands have this dynamic between those departments?
Well, and I will add that our CEO is aligned as well, so we're all aligned and committed, as I said. What Ashley touched on it. What's really exciting is that no one company can do this alone. I mean, Charlie's example just is a perfect example of that, where they started something and pulled lots of organizations together. We have to work with all stakeholders, within the company, but externally as well. So what I love about my job is it's the most external I've ever been in my 30 years of Colgate. So Ashley and I were on a call this morning with the CGF, and I've run into Charlie before. So we all kind of know each other. So we do get a pretty good feel for what's going on with our peers and even with our competitors and how we're working together. So the answer to the question is yes, I see that collaboration. And in fact, we had yesterday on a whole different subject, but it was around the Forest Positive Coalition with the CGF, and it was just a meeting with the CPOs, and the CSOs and the CPOs were on that call together. So I do see that happening. I think that is a critical relationship, and again, we have never been more dependent on our procurement teams, and Charlie's right, it's never been a tougher time for those teams as well. So we have to work together on all these challenges.
Very encouraging to hear. Yes, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I've really enjoyed this discussion and getting all your insights. It's been really, really positive, and lots to think about, but also lots of things to take away and build upon. So thank you all for taking part in this panel, and look forward to interacting with you further in the future. And thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.